All right, guys, Mr. Sherwin, I'm back. This is the last short little video on urban America. So the last time I left you, I wanted you to jot down some answers to some of these questions. Things about how are cities separated? Why would you want to move to the city if you were a farmer? Does alcohol cause crime? Do drugs? If we made those things illegal, would we have less or more crime? Why or why not? And do you think political machines are really gone? Do we still have groups in our country that still sort of control how people vote? If we do, uh, or don't, tell me why. Okay. And then what do you think caused the disease and death rate to drop so much after the Gilded Age? We looked at some problems afterward. What were some things we talked about that did drop the mortality rate during that time? Okay. So we're going to wrap it up here. We've talked about a lot of these things so far. Tammany Hall, pollution, urbanization, Lily Sullivan. We talked about party bosses. We talked about some of the pull factors of migrations, where people lived in the cities. So we're just going to kind of wrap it up here. Okay. So culture. I've mentioned the Gilded Age before, and you heard me talk about it. Really, it's a term coined by Mark Twain and Charles Warner in 1873. They had a novel called The Gilded Age, and what it was about problems that big problems on the surface, but on the outside, people think everything is just great, everything's hunky dory. So the time period from 1870 to 1900 is referred to as the Gilded Age, and gilded refers to something gold on the outside while the inside is made of cheaper material. This is kind of like plated. You know, if you have a gold plated ring or gold plated earring, it looks really good on the outside. Oh, that's a beautiful necklace you have. That's a beautiful pair of earrings you have. But it's really just plated. Just a thin layer of gold is on the outside. And so the Gilded Age, in the same respect, it looks good from the perspective of government. It looks good from the perspective of other countries because there's tons and tons of growth. However, beneath that surface is a lot of corruption, poverty, and a huge difference between rich and poor. So the Gilded Age is a time of massive growth, but we have to do something about these problems. And we'll do something about these problems a little bit later when we talk about the Progressive Era. So when I say gilded, you should think, oh, yeah, that looks good on the outside, but underneath is kind of junk. Okay. You would never want, your fiance to give you a gold plated ring. Okay. Or a gilded ring. You'd want pure gold. Okay. I promise you, you will not receive a second date if you give your girl or boyfriend jewelry that is gilded that you got out of a 25-cent machine at Kroger. Don't do that. Get them the real thing. Okay. So another idea that comes about during this time, there's so much competition between businesses and people, and there's a huge difference between the rich and the poor. And a lot of the rich come up with this idea based on Darwin's idea of Darwinism, the idea that only the strongest survive, based on his origin of species studies that he did when he talked about evolution. And a lot of people believe this new idea called social Darwinism. A man named Herbert Spencer, you don't need to know his name. What matters is what is social Darwinism. Well, so what social Darwinism is, it's Darwinism, but it's taken to a social level. Instead of people are changing biologically slowly through competition and survival of the fittest, what social Darwinism means is that slowly through competition, people become rich, or because they don't work hard and they don't compete, they remain poor. So it's like a social ladder theory that if I'm rich, I did something to get rich. And if you're poor, then obviously you didn't do the things you needed to do to not be poor. And so you deserve to be poor. And so this is an idea that comes out in the Gilded Age. Again, human society evolves through competition. And if you can't adapt to the changing culture and the changing environment, the changing economy of this new world in the Industrial Revolution, you are going to fall flat on your face. You are going to remain poor and on the bottom rung of society's ladder. So I like to think of it this way. Think of evolution, from monkey to man, where if you think of social Darwinism, slowly over time, you work hard, you deserve to have better. So you go the very poor, kind of immigrant working in a factory. And if you work hard enough and you compete enough and you're cutthroat enough, you'll move up to sort of like, trailer park. I'm living in a better area, but I'm still not where I want to be. So I'm going to work a little harder. And now I'm living in a nice house in the city, and I'm continuing to be cutthroat and compete and run the other guy out. And because of all those things, I'm now part of the rich elite. And so that's the idea. Mostly from the rich elite. Yeah, obviously, if you were poor, you would not have any belief at all in social Darwinism. So again, the top is Darwin's idea of evolution biologically, and the bottom, social Darwinism, is social evolution. People sort of fit into a role in society and an economic class, which you can believe or not believe, but this is a prevalent theory at the time. Okay. Last couple things to talk about here. Education starts for other groups during this time in the late 1880s. Because of all this increase of industry, we need better trained workers. So we need to have job skill training. We need to have training for these immigrants. We need to find ways to make them successful because there's such a demand for labor because of this industrial revolution. Okay. And as a result, we have a need for more schools and colleges. We've talked about a few of these before, and they kind of run in together from westward expansion into industrial revolution. The big thing is we need immigrants to become knowledgeable about American culture. And they want to become knowledgeable. They want to become Americanized. They want to be successful. And so you're going to have schools that pop up in major cities that will help immigrants and help women and help men become more American-like so they can be successful in this changing culture and economy. Okay. One of the ways that many immigrants, mostly women and children, received American education was through settlement houses. When they came over here, they didn't have many skills, could not speak English. And so a woman named Jane Addams, later a civil rights activist, she developed a settlement house called Hull House. And settlement houses are intended to help immigrants adjusting to living in America by teaching them English, job skills, and helping them adjust to life in America. When they first were introduced, these settlement houses provided things like daycare for women. So women could go out and get the training they needed so they could work, so they could provide for their family. And again, the most famous of these houses is called the Hull House in Chicago, founded in 1889. And after the success of Hull House, Jane Addams' sort of fight for immigrant rights and Americanization of immigrants, around 500 of these settlement houses popped up all around America. So very successful. Again, schools improve for different groups during this time of American Industrial Revolution. Okay, here's a picture of Jane Addams and Hull House, the most well-known of the settlement houses and the first. She would again inspire people to create other settlement houses all across America. But if you notice, you'll see a commonality. You don't see a lot of Asian immigrants or African American immigrants in these particular houses. These, again, are for these new immigrants coming over from Eastern Europe and some old immigrants from Western Europe. African Americans are going to have problems for a long time after the Civil War. Slavery's over, but we still have problems with discrimination and prejudice and lack of opportunities. One of the ways that they were helped was in 1881 by a man named Booker T. Washington, who formed the first college for African Americans in Alabama called Tuskegee. You've heard of Tuskegee before, I hope. Hopefully you've heard of Booker T. Washington before. Many high schools around the area in the country actually are named after Booker T. Washington. Another woman who we used to have a school here in Shreveport named after was Mary McLeod Bethune. She was also a civil rights activist. Booker T. Washington is sort of the father of education for African Americans. And so he did form this first African American college in Alabama. It was designed to teach African American trade skills and teach them successful habits in the workplace. So Booker T. Washington realized that slavery had died, sharecropping was basically over. We needed to teach African Americans other skills, sort of a blue collar work, hands-on manual labor jobs to help them compete in factories and places all across in the West. So when we talk about W.B. Du Bois later, he will have different ideas about what African Americans need, but it's still important to understand how Booker T. Washington really started improving education for African Americans. Here's a picture of Tuskegee, very old picture, the original building. It's been torn down since, but you can still go. There still is a Tuskegee Institute. And this is Booker T. Washington here on the right. Okay, one of the last things to talk about is who else needs help? We need to help farmers. So we need to get people trained on how to use this new equipment and how to repair it and how to use it more effectively. So something we've already talked about, something called the Morrill Land Grant Act, which gave federal land grants to states for the purpose of establishing agricultural and mechanical colleges. That's how we